Hello, and thanks so much for tuning in to the Scaling People podcast. I'm your host, Rasika Rajagopalan, and today I am so excited to be chatting with Liz Simon, Chief Operating Officer at Industrious. Previously COO at General Assembly, Liz has led a broad swath of teams ranging from legal, HR, and broader operations. Being at Industrious, she lives and breathes the question of how remote work, hybrid work, and in-person work models affect our day-to-day productivity and collaboration. So I'm really excited to get into all that with her and see where she thinks the future of work is heading. So Liz, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Rasika. It's great to be here.
So great, and so great to chat with you, especially with this topic. As we were chatting about, this is just so topical. And so to start, for those that are unfamiliar, can you share a little bit about Industrious and what you feel like differentiates your brand from other co-working businesses?
Sure. So Industrious is a global operator of flexible workplaces. So we operate about 200 locations all over the world, although we're headquartered here in New York, where I'm based. And we have a range of products ranging from coworking, which is probably the thing we're most known for, to tenant experience, where we help landlords improve the experience across the whole portfolios of buildings that they operate. But what makes us different from other coworking providers out there is really our sort of hospitality and service focus. Customer experience has been at the very, very center of what we do. So we really see ourselves as operating in the hospitality space and providing a really premium experience for folks in our spaces. So you get full inclusive amenities in an Industrious, whether that's free breakfast every morning, snack every afternoon, a very personalized experience that is about really creating connections and value for you, not just for the people in your company, but with the other members in the space. So yeah, I think the real differentiator is about hospitality, experience, and service and amenities.
I love that. I think that's what, makes it feel like a home, especially when you're co-working with maybe other individuals that may or may not be part of your organization. And so I'm curious, maybe to start with companies now shifting back to in-person or hybrid models, what do you feel like this means for the future of remote work? Do you feel like the remote work revolution's coming to an end, or are we seeing a natural correction after maybe the dial swung really hard in one way? What do you see in the future?
I mean, I see just like there's no more binary in this world anymore. I think we are in general in a place where individual decision making has a lot more impact about where and how people work than anything else, even in the face of companies having return to work mandates and things like that. I think this is a moment where the power is shifting in many ways back towards individuals. And so I just don't think, is it hybrid, is it remote, is it in person? I think it's everything. I think it's all on a spectrum, and all types of work are relevant, and work should be much more purpose-based than anything else. And where you work, in my opinion, should be most correlated with the type of work you're doing and who you need to do it with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. I think this model works really well for some companies, may not work as well for others. And so that's actually a great segue into how do you decide as an organization? Maybe you're in an awkward middle ground where you have some people in an office, they're not necessarily coming in a structured way. You have a big remote team, or maybe you're a founder that's starting a company and thinking about what makes the most sense for you at your stage. How do you decide which model is right for you?
I don't think there's one right answer. I think that it is, in my opinion, I think the most important thing is to have a point of view and to give people choice and flexibility. So again, you should be thinking about what are the types of work that my team needs to do, and what are the environments in which they're most likely to be successful at doing those things, and what are the goals of being together in a space, because there are a lot of incredibly valuable, important parts of working together with other people. Obviously, Industrious believes deeply in the value of human connection and IRL work. But if your purpose is you want people to have more affinity, for your culture, then really make sure your gatherings are about strengthening that culture, connecting people, fostering that trust and social ties and things like that. if it is about moving faster on a particular product, find space for a temporary need for people to sprint on a project together, make sure there's lots of ability for them to do creative thinking and brainstorming and whiteboarding and whatever else it is. But if it's like, dude, you need to go write a memo and crank heads down, like, is that the sort of thing that's best done in an open concept workspace? Like, probably not. So I just think, again, it goes back to like, what are the goals that you want to try to achieve by bringing people together? What are the types of work that is best done together? And then making sure that your employees have flexibility to choose, like follow their lead. And I think that is going to serve a lot of organizations well, even though it's obviously not the path that many organizations are choosing in this moment.
Yeah, for sure. It was interesting how earlier you were talking about, the employer market versus an employee-driven market. So I know during the peak of COVID, tons of companies were hiring. And so it was very much an employee market where companies were thinking about what are the benefits that I need to offer to attract and retain talent. Things shifted around maybe, 2023, where, companies were doing a little more layoffs, jobs were a bit more scarce in tech, and so it became an employer market. And a year after that, that's when you started to see companies start to require more of that in-office work. So with a lot of companies now starting to require and build a little bit more structure around their in-office presence, do you see that more as a product of it being maybe a more employer-driven market, or do you think that companies will revert back to flexibility when it's more of an employee market, or we're in a post-COVID correction phase? Like, it has nothing to do with that.
I think we're still in a bit of a post-COVID correction phase where people are, like, the pendulum is still swinging and it hasn't kind of like landed in any one place. Like, my sense is directionally, in a macro sense, power is shifting more towards individuals, like separate apart from like, where companies are. But I do think like we are in a moment where, companies are hiring a lot more again. And so it does kind of track that like there's a bit of a realignment to kind of individual power and like, leading into that flexibility. But also just like, I do think many companies literally didn't have a point of view. And so some of this work is just like kind of baseline, what is their point of view, and finally establishing that all these years later after COVID is like, what do we actually want to be true? And, the ones that are competing the most for talent probably offer a lot more flexibility, and the ones perhaps that don't have to compete as much for talent are maybe less open to flexibility. And that kind of seems to be bearing out in the trends that we're seeing of, who has sort of virtual first or much more flexible hybrid policies, who has more firm 5-day in the office a week. It tends to correlate with like, how much are these companies competing for talent? Because I don't ultimately think of a 5-day in the office mandate is going to be a long-term competitive strategy for companies.
Yeah, definitely. And for a lot of this, it all comes back down to ROI. Just because you open up an office doesn't necessarily mean everyone's going to be more productive or vice versa. And that being said, it is definitely more expensive to invest in that in-office presence. I think I've done some calculations before looking at the cost of our, in-person gatherings compared to what it would cost us to, have a desk and have an office with all these amenities. And so there's a real productivity measure that I think is helpful when you are assessing, where you want to make those investments. And so, a lot of this transition back to the office, I think on the surface seems like it's about productivity and concerns around remote, is it delivering the same results? And so how do you measure that? Like, do you think it's more of a perception issue, or do you think that, there is some real data that to back that up? What do you see out there in terms of what the research is showing and how leaders can think about those investments?
I personally have not seen a lot of data that shows like hybrid. Like, I think the data is most clear on the point that like hybrid work and having some kind of employee choice and flexibility yields to like, optimal engagement outcomes. I assume there are productivity metrics that companies who are moving to 5-day in-office mandates are looking at to make those decisions. I personally have not seen that data myself. I do not like, I do not know what people are actually looking at to make those decisions. Is it, how long people are logged into their emails or systems? Is it like how many emails or Slacks they're sending? Is it like the flow through or outputs of teams? Like, I assume and hope there's some version of data that's being looked at. But then again, like, I deep down personally believe that there's some just kind of like inherent, assumptions being made, like among leaders who are kind of like, used to a different way of working. I don't know that it's all that. I don't, and I think obviously there is some data suggesting that there are types of work for which remote work is not well suited. But then again, why not just embed flexibility in a policy so that you can remote work when you need to and work together at other times when you need to?
Yeah, definitely. And it's not so one-to-one as it was pre-COVID. I think pre-COVID, a lot of people's networks were very localized to where they lived and where they worked. Now, because of the last 4 years where remote exploded, a lot of us, we have a good network in San Francisco and in New York and in Seattle because of the fact that we've worked with people in all these places. So I do think the concept of the office is also changing, where it's not, one company is going to have this primary location that's only in this major city and that's it. And so I'm just curious where co-working kind of fits into that. How can companies leverage, organizations like Industrious to supplement their hybrid or in-person strategy effectively?
I mean, I will point people to an article in Bloomberg this past week about Allstate, which you may have seen, but was basically like, this is a legacy industrial like insurance company who has let go of their entire headquarters, which was in Chicago, and made a big bet on using co-working essentially as a part of their office strategy. And they said, I think some really kind of remarkable things for a company of their size and scale, which was basically like, let's see where our people are going and we will build there. And I do think that kind of flips on its head of like the if you build it, they will come kind of mentality of like offices. Like, let's actually design a policy that allows people to choose where they want to go. There are other companies out there like Dropbox, like Atlassian, who have these virtual first policies, and they do offer on-demand access to co-working spaces or some sort of dedicated spaces plus on-demand access. They follow where their people are going, and then they make decisions about where to plant roots. And it doesn't need to be a leased office for your company. It could be in a co-working space, or it could be in a lease that you own yourself. But I just think following the activity of what people are organically doing, who's getting together, when and where, is what I would encourage. And I think the thing about co-working is it lets companies experiment in a much more low-cost, asset-light, liability-light manner with those sorts of things. You can test out what happens if I give 100 people in New York access to be able to book, co-working spaces, and how often are people going to use it? Where are they going to show up? What types of meetings are they going to do in person? What types of work are they going to do at home? I just think it's an easier way to test and experiment, which, if you're thinking about this, like in terms of product development, you want to be able to test, gain learnings. And again, I think rather than try to convince everyone to move, your long tail of offices to co-working, I would advocate for like, just give people optionality, see what they do, and use that to help inform the decisions that you're gonna make. Is honestly, I think, a realistic way to, for companies to proceed in this moment of kind of uncertainty.
Yeah, definitely. How do you recommend, going back to sort of this idea that people are going to be spread out as it is, whether or not you mandate them to be in one place or whether they personally choose to be. One challenge that I've seen emerge is that, you have this co-working space or you have this office, you're in marketing, there's one person from product there, one person from sales there, but then, your other marketing counterparts are, somewhere else. So you come to the office, you're on Zoom all day anyways. How do you counteract that, especially when you approach it with a little bit more flexibility so you have less control over, the collaboration opportunities that exist within the people that come to that space?
Again, I would go back to what's the purpose of gathering in person. In my opinion, and in the Industrious, I think point of view is that there is value from an organizational affinity and culture standpoint to having people who sit on disparate teams get together and know each other. And so I would argue that like, it's true that maybe those people do not come to the office to collaborate together, but maybe then they don't need to come 2 days a week all on the same days. Maybe it's that they should come one day a month, or I'm making it up, but maybe they should come on a different cadence. And the purpose of getting together is like, socializing, doing a company event, watching an all hands together, like, I don't know, some kind of more like company oriented activity, going, to a happy hour, those sorts of things. I feel like, again, if you're asking like how should companies think about flex, it's like, if you just want a space to go one day a month, like there's no other way to achieve that other than using some kind of flex space.
Right.
Yeah, but I guess deep down, I would say like you have to think about what is the purpose again of that, getting that group of people together. And my guess is it's not to collaborate, so therefore I care less if you're sitting together and collaborating two days a week, and like on the hybrid policy that the rest of the organization is more that just like, hey, I live in Denver and I want to have affinity to a set of colleagues who are in this long tail of kind of pockets of employees around the country or around the globe, which I think has a lot of value. It's even how we run our own team. Like we do gatherings once a month for those teams. They do not have a requirement to sit in an office if they don't want to, but we want our teammates in those markets to be getting together at least once a month together to collaborate and just socialize and like build relationships.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, honestly, to your point, there is so much value in having that cross-functional face time. Perhaps you lose that when you have everyone in the same space. I remember back in the office, usually the sales team primarily is interacting with the sales people around them, same with marketing, same with product and engineering. So you're going to be getting that face time anyways on Zoom, but now here's a sort of forcing function for you to engage with people that you may not otherwise actually be interacting with on a daily basis. So there's that added value there. From your perspective, as you've brought on more customers over the last few years, have their needs evolved at all? Are there features or amenities that are becoming more essential for companies using co-working spaces?
I would say two things. One, the like consuming spaces fractionally is just like much more important for companies today than it ever was a few years ago. So meaning like, hey, I want an office, but I only want it 2 days a week, or I only want it one day a month, or I want to be able to like tack on the ability for my team to be able, 20 people to be able to access a space that's only for 5 people, just because like they may come in on different days and we really never have that much usage. And when we have all 20 people, we'll just use a meeting room and we'll have meeting room credits instead. Like there's just a lot more ability to kind of like build your own, like choose your own adventure model of like what you actually need and buy on demand the things that you want, which just a few years ago didn't exist in the co-working industry. And it's driven obviously by what customers are asking for. They want to couple together different things on different frequencies. And, we then obviously want to make that available to them. I think the other kind of design space product thing that we see happening, which I find so fascinating, is I think co-working spaces are known for like you sit in basically like a glass box and like all your people are like in a room and like that's your primary place, versus like people want to be able to access all different types of spaces within an office setting for different types of work. So they want to flow out to the common area spaces and be able to have a comfortable place to sit where they can do some quiet work or emails. They want to be able to have phone booths they can pop into when they need to get on a Zoom or a call. And they don't want to be doing those sitting in a room with other people. I think like the notion that we used to take calls together sitting next to each other in an open like floor plan office is kind of bonkers, and like most people are like, what? You did what?
How did we do that? Yeah.
How did we do that? So I just think like the kind of four walls of your space being your space is no longer now. Like I think the way most people think about having a co-working office, and they see it more as like, okay, what is the whole, how do I flow throughout this space throughout my day? Does it have all the types of spaces that I'm going to want to be able to use for? So that has definitely influenced how we design spaces, with a lot more common areas that are a lot more, for example, set up for, everything has a power outlet, everything has an ergonomic chair. It's not just a bunch of soft seating where you can like, you're stuck in a like couch that you're like, you can't get out of after like sitting there for 2 hours or whatever. and a lot more phone booths so that when people have those private Zooms that they need to be on, that they're not disrupting their colleagues in doing that. So yeah, I mean, I think that's probably one of the big shifts we've seen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you even see that shift in a lot of these flexible, like Blue Ground, these short stay, like every one of these homes, they have like a
100%.
desk set up with a camera, monitor. So yeah, it's interesting to see that trend in these co-working spaces, but also in these short-term, apartments and things like that you can rent.
100%. People want to be able to like just fluidly, in many ways, like just combine work with the rest of their life in a way that I just don't think before COVID we had any like sense of. And so it does flow through, the like, is there dedicated desk space on Airbnb? Like that's obviously, one of the filter things that you can check and all that. Like I think it's just become much more important to people, and the blurring of like personal and work, has made
Yes.
that
Yes.
more
Yes. Yes. I love how you touched on just this value of gathering, whether it's something you do a couple times a week or maybe even once a month. Last week, we had Katie Burke on the podcast, and she shared this book called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. And it talks a lot about how, you can just, a lot of companies, they invest in offsites, but without that real intentionality, you may not get the full value of that gathering. And I know it depends on specifically what you're looking for, but are there any strategies or any specific practices that you've incorporated to really just enable people to get to know each other on a deeper level through the gatherings that you host?
Well, I would say they range from like small to big, but to start with some of the small ones, like I think one of the smartest things that Industrious does is, I mentioned we offer a daily breakfast and snack. Now you're like, yeah, that's a cool amenity. People like free food. Great. What that really is those are facilitated times where all of the members are coming together at the same time every day and gathering. And they are getting together in the kitchen at like a set time every day. And our frontline teams are there facilitating connections between people. They're very intentionally designed. They're not just like we put out the food and we go disappear and like go back and sit at our desk. That is a time for like actually connecting, fostering like, bringing people together. So that's an example of stuff that happens within our space that is like very much a part of the model. And then there's obviously like, every Thursday a happy hour, and you're like, yeah, sure, you put out like bottles of, wine and beer, but it's like, no, those are intentional moments that are designed for people in the community who don't often work together, but who are what I like to call faux workers. You're like the people you see every day, but they're not your coworkers, to actually get together. So that's an example of like some of the just small, I would say, gathering moments that we have that are but also very intentionally curated moments. We have a lot larger moments as well. We believe in like, we love quirky, weird, competitive things as like anchors of gathering. So whether it's like, I can, off the top of my head, like a few of the things are like, blind water tastings, or like, things that are like truly like writing a haiku contest, or like just things that are like kind of quirky, weird, but like that get people just to be a little bit vulnerable and a little bit outside of their comfort zone. Like I think are always really important when you're thinking about intentional gathering.
Sure.
We do them as a team within our company. We do them with our members, and I think a lot of it is ground up. Like a lot of this stuff happens very organically within our communities. Obviously we love to test stuff even with our own team and then deploy it in our community, across our locations at scale. So a lot of times we think about using our own team for like, we're doing, for example, tonight we have a, Thanksgiving dinner for our team internally, kind of like a Friendsgiving, and we're doing these, at all our locations around the country. We've been doing them over the last couple of weeks, as every location is having a little Thanksgiving dinner, which is like, again, it's little things like that.
I love those ideas. Yeah, food is always one of my favorite ways to bring people together. Well, I guess as we wrap, I have one last question and one last trend for you, which is I've noticed that in this era of co-working, this era of flexibility, another really cool thing that you're seeing is, previously you would go to your office, you would work with a bunch of people within your company, you'd go home. Now I'm seeing, a couple companies sharing a space together. Maybe their investor has some space, so they're like, hey, why don't, you all come here, you all come here. I'm sure at Industrious, right, you have like multiple companies coming together. And so how can and I think that's great to be able to be in a regular space with people that are working on maybe similar but really different problems. So what are some ways that people that are in a position where they're interacting with people that are not at their company regularly, like how can they best learn from each other? How can they best kind of engage in a way that, helps them sort of individually build each other up?
Yeah, I mean, I love this. I think that like faux worker, what we call them, that point is so important. Like, it's really cool when you get to see people who organically make connections. Like we have examples of people who've like formed businesses together or like formed partnerships, and you're just like, man, that's so freaking cool that like they found each other. So, some of it is like just being present at those gatherings, right? Like being amenable and open to new connections. I would, like for our team, it's like if you said, hey, I'm here to, network and meet some more people, and I'm really particularly interested in X, Y, or Z, like, could you introduce me to some people? Like, I just make that known. Show up to the stuff, make make what you're looking for known, and we do our best to make those dot connections when we can for people. But I think it's really taking advantage of like the community thing, showing up to the events, like again, being an active part of the community. Like we like to think this is a place where you can be enriched personally and professionally. So the professional enrichment part, I think, is really valuable. But it is the kind of thing that like you get out what you put in to those sorts of things. I find that a lot of our members are very vocal in being like, or like promoting their own business, or being like, do you have customers that you could recommend for me? And I love that sort of stuff. Reaching out to share what they're working on. We literally, highlighted a bunch of entrepreneurs yesterday for National Entrepreneurship Day who are working within our spaces, who, are working on just cool stuff, and we, sent out a newsletter about them. So I just think, I think there's, a lot of kind of big and small ways, that people can sort of network themselves more broadly within the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in my sort of early days of working, I remember there was a HR and talent breakfast group in Boston. So every month, another person would choose to host this breakfast in their office. And so, I think through that experience and through other experiences I've had, like when you and I met at CPOHQ a couple months ago, you start to realize the problems that we're solving are actually more similar than they are different. And so, I learned so much from all of those interactions. And in many cases, my relationships with those individuals are just as strong as my relationships with actual coworkers that I've spent, days working with. And so, that as companies are thinking about the value and investment in these co-working spaces, even where, they may not have enough, maybe you're mixed with other coworkers from other companies, just the value and the learning and being able to engage with them is huge.
And there's a lot of research on this point in particular about like it sparking innovation and like co-working spaces actually being like a linchpin of innovation. There's a professor from Harvard Business School named Maria Roche, I think I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, who's written on this, and so like the academic like papers back it up, that there are, they find these examples of, increased innovation and throughput from companies who are in some of these co-working spaces because of the kind of like nature of being able to access diverse perspectives, meet other people, be around other innovative businesses, things like that.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Liz, I really appreciate you taking time to come on the show. It was so fun to, dig a little bit deeper into your experiences and specifically everything that Industrious is working on. So thanks so much for sharing more about your journey. Until next time.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I feel like we could talk about this topic all day. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.